how do you repair after rupture? Do you know how to do that? Because if we're talking about individual relationships, right? You need to know yourself. You need to know your triggers. You need to know your history. You need to know your own injuries, your unresolved childhood stuff, and your resolved childhood stuff. Because those things you can still be very sensitive to things because of your stuff, but you need two people who are willing to do that. Because when in a relationship, I'll always teach couples, we each need to know what is the other person's activation point, right? If you have, if I grew up in a family system where I had a father who never listened to me, and I feel like my husband is on his phone while I'm trying to talk to him, I might be more activated by that than someone who didn't have that parental experience. So part of it is knowing your partner well enough, or knowing your sister or your friend well enough to know what their pain points are, what are their challenges, and then we're careful not to trample on them when we are in conflict. When rupture happens in a relationship, meaningful repair means there has to be a willingness to go back, right? So you have to be clear about what you experienced, but there has to be a willingness to come back together. Language to come back together. I'm upset. I need some time, but this is important to me and you're important to me. So can we come back in 30 minutes, right? If you need time, being clear about what your own need is in order to get to repair, because you can be direct without being aggressive, right? And everyone has needs in relationships, and needs aren't demands, right? This is just information. But when you don't express your needs, a lot of times this is when things come out, leak out sideways, sort of come out as criticism of the other person or resentment of the other person. So how do we get to repair? Is you have to want to, and you have to be willing to be vulnerable in a way, because that is what's required. Can you admit when you're wrong? Can you come back and say, you know what, I'm sorry, my tone was really harsh this morning. I am upset about that thing, but I regret the way that I said it. Can we start again? Right? There's all ways of coming back together from the point of view of this dyad, where we're talking about two people. But in order to do it on a global scale, in order to do it reaching across the aisle, whether it's political or something else, you have to know how to do it within your own personal relationships, because the same thing that blocks you from doing it personally will block you from doing it on a bigger level. So what are some of the essential elements of repair? Owning your part without defensiveness or justification, naming the impact, not just the intention, because a lot of times we want to be defensive and say, but that's not what I meant. It's important to be able to say, I see that that hurt you, and I'm sorry, right? Just being able to be sorry in a relationship is incredible. Staying specific. We stay away from these global statements of always and you never and you always, right? Really being mindful and careful about our language. Being willing to hear the other person's experience without interrupting or correcting. That's hard, especially if you feel like they're getting it wrong. But we have to create this space for both people to be able to do it. Because when we're trying to repair, it's really not about who's right. It's about restoring the connection. And, there's this old saying, do you want to be right or do you want to be loving? Because you can't be both. I mean, there's some version of that that's been around for decades and decades. And I think that there's truth to that. And I think that we have to remember when we are thinking about repair, like I'll always say to my husband, hey, this is not you against me. This is us against this problem. Really trying to set up a collective, like we both want the same thing, because neither one of us, most people in relationships do not want to be fighting. But I think that we have to take responsibility for what happens for us. And this goes from the personal to the collective, right? Notice your own urge to defend, to explain, to withdraw, right? That is your cue, if you're feeling that way, to slow down. Regulate your nervous system first breathe, then communicate, right? You can take a pause without abandoning the conversation. You can even just say, hey, can I get a timeout to grab a glass of water if you need that to regulate, right? Because staying present, listen, this is not about perfection, right? Because this is hard stuff, but it means staying engaged and not cutting off the connection right then and there.